All right, welcome back in here to Live and Out from Fox. I'm Andy Mack. Hurricane season is upon us, and as we've seen the last couple of years, 2025 will be no different. It's expected to be a very active hurricane season. You can see this post from NOAA talking about how they're expecting some 13 to 19 named storms, 3 to 5 major hurricanes. So that is the probability heading into the season as it officially kicks off on June the 1st. A live picture right now at some of the areas that were impacted last year and obviously getting prepared for what's to come this year. All right, let's bring in right now to the conversation for more on this, a hurricane hunter himself, Lieutenant Commander Chris Wood with the NOAA Commission Corps. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. How prepared do you guys feel for this upcoming hurricane season?
Well, we've definitely been spending the last several weeks really in a full court press, making sure that both our personnel and our aircraft have everything that they need to be able to support any sort of hurricane flights that we end up having this season. So we're feeling pretty good right now going into it. We're going to spend every moment that we have until the first storm making sure that we continue to practice, go over our procedures, and that we're fully prepared for this season.
And I know you guys do a lot, and of course, it's no real off season as you jump back into it, but describe some of the preparation. What are the keys? What are you looking into? Is it instruments? Is it aircraft? What's the preparation look like?
Yeah, so, I mean, we have a lot of different assets that we're bringing together to make sure that we're ready for hurricane season, making sure all of our pilots, navigators, flight directors, engineers, everyone that we have on board the aircraft has all the training and the proficiency that they need to safely operate the aircraft and all of the different equipment we have, making sure that the aircraft themselves are in peak performance, that all the maintenance and preventative maintenance and like future requirements that we possibly have, we have all the parts and everything else we need in case the aircraft do encounter problems, that everything's ready to go for the season. And we've spent the last several weeks doing a lot of different calibration flights and making sure that all of our instrumentation is good and ready to go so that when we're called on to go fly these storms, we can give our partners in the National Hurricane Center and the National Weather Service all the information they need so that they can get those advisories out as soon and accurately as possible.
And we're seeing some video of inside of that plane going through some of these hurricanes. If you were to describe it in one word, how would you describe what it's like to go inside of a hurricane?
In one word, that would probably be bumpy. The analogy we like to use for this is kind of going on an old rickety wooden roller coaster while simultaneously being in a car wash.
And you guys are obviously doing science up there, measuring the instruments at the time. How difficult is it when the turbulence is like what it is in this video?
So, we go up into these storms expecting there to be turbulence, and we take appropriate mitigations through analyzing all the different risk and utilizing all the different players that are on the aircraft to find the safest way to still accomplish all of our missions. Sometimes you're going to encounter some pretty heavy turbulence, but we've safely made sure all of our people are safe, they're buckled up when we're expecting to encounter turbulence, and that any science that we're doing in those high turbulence areas can be done safely.
That is very good, and obviously a little bit bumpy. The camera work shows what's going on there. But what do you learn from being at an altitude? Maybe how high do you guys fly, and what can you learn differently at an altitude like that versus being on the ground?
So the storm is going to change all throughout the different altitudes that it's impacting, right? So from the surface all the way up to 50,000+ feet, there's going to be changes to how the storm's different characteristics, kind of present themselves and everything else like that. So the altitudes that we choose, which are generally somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 feet, are optimal for what our aircraft can accomplish and what our instruments are looking to measure. As you get to lower altitudes, you typically get down to a little bit more turbulent areas, especially where the sea and the air start to mix together. We try to avoid those because they're just a little bit too dangerous. But when it comes to the higher altitudes, we have a different aircraft, the Gulfstream NOAA 49, that actually flies in those higher altitudes to collect the data up there that's beyond the range of the P3 itself. But we're looking to get a whole bunch of different data, including air column data, in situ pressure, wind, humidity data. And then, of course, we have our tail Doppler radar, which is almost like taking a CAT scan of the storm as we fly through it.
That is so very interesting. And I was reading up on it that not only do you measure vertically, but you measure horizontally as well. How difficult is that, and how big of a area around the aircraft are you measuring when you're going through a hurricane?
So actually, the amount of area that we can measure is going to be it's going to vary a little bit throughout the storm based on just how much precipitation and other things that are going on in the storm, because these radars do get attenuated. So the more heavy the precipitation that we're going to have in these storms, of course, we're going to end up limiting some of the range that we can actually see out. But generally, we're measuring somewhere in the 10 to 25-mile range.
Right, that is very interesting, and obviously, as you move along, that is quite the area in terms of this. And you mentioned the aircrafts that go above it, the Gulfstream, but the one that you pilot, the WP-3D Orion aircraft, you affectionately named the two planes Kermit and Miss Piggy. Can you describe a little bit of the personality of these two planes that go into hurricanes?
Yeah, so these airplanes are approaching 50 years old, so they're definitely veterans of doing this. They flew storms from the moment they first came out. The one that earned their nickname first was actually Miss Piggy, because Miss Piggy required a lot of additional attention, just like the Muppet character themselves. So they've earned their nicknames basically through a lot of what maintenance had to do in their initial lifetime.
That was very good, and I guess we're lucky in terms of the Muppets that no one or on Sesame Street named Oscar the Grouch, so that is good in terms of the aircraft about that. We talk about just some of the measurements. You measured air pressure, humidity, all sorts of things. Can you describe that a little bit more in detail? Because we talk about pressure, and it's hard to really comprehend that. How important is it to gather some of that information to know how strong a hurricane is, the path, all that sorts of stuff?
Right. So the center pressure of the storm is going to be a really key indicator for just how strong that storm is. And the deeper the storm is, or the lower the pressure that we find in the middle, is typically indicative of the strength of the storm itself. So as we're flying along in the storm, we're measuring not only our flight level, so it's usually somewhere around 10,000 foot pressures, but we're also dropping dropsondes throughout this, which are going to measure from the aircraft all the way down to the surface of the ocean and be collecting all that same kind of data, so that they can feed all that into the models and their understanding and make the best prediction for actually how strong these storms are going to be, and measuring the max winds all throughout the air column.
And when we talk about pressure, the eye of the storm seems to catch a lot of people's attention as well. Is it very noticeable when you enter the eye of a storm, and what's it like to kind of break through that eye wall?
So every storm is a little different. What we want to see is we want to be going through the eye wall, at which point you can't see anything at all. We're completely flying based on our instruments, because there's too much cloud and rain in those areas for us to actually see out the windshield. And generally, on a lot of storms, when we come out through that eye wall, it's going to be all of a sudden like you just came out of the other side of a severe thunderstorm in your car, and you can just see suddenly. Like, you actually have the ability to see. There's no clouds. If it's the daytime, you get nice sun and everything else like that, and you can see. A lot of storms that have the bigger eye, you'll get that for a couple minutes. Some storms will have really, really small eyes, and they may be murky, and there might be clouds in there too. So it may not be as dramatic as we would normally like, but you go from seeing nothing at all and getting rocked to suddenly having generally pretty calm winds and good visibility. So it's pretty dramatic when you come into the eye.
And as we talked about, we had some really strong, some major hurricanes last year. We saw Milton, we saw Debbie, we saw Helene. Do anything stand out amongst those storms? Do you remember specific storms just based on some of the flights? Are there different characteristics that stand out based on the storms of last year?
Yeah, so I flew all of those storms last year as they were making landfall. I was the last NOAA flight into Milton as they made landfall as well. One that stands out to me was actually Helene, though, just prior to Milton. It was a Category 4. It was coming. It hadn't quite made landfall yet, but it was a really, really, really bumpy ride going into the eye, and that was pretty memorable to me, because it was just a lot bumpier than we kind of expected. Whereas when Milton was a Category 5, there was actually a couple passes where it was incredibly well behaved, and the going through the eye wall was not entirely smooth, but it was a lot smoother than we would have expected.
Do you learn anything from the turbulence, or is that just how the aircraft handles it? Can you specifically gather information just on feel, like turbulence?
So, there's a lot of people actually collecting some turbulence data, but the reality is that as these storms kind of mature and they get more organized, a lot of times they smooth out a little bit. So the strength of the storm and the turbulence are not necessarily related at all. a lot of times our bumpier and more turbulent rides are actually on the tropical storms in the category 1s and 2s, where they're still sort of like getting their engine built to be a full hurricane, right? And they're getting all their act together. It's almost they're maturing, and so they're acting out a little bit. So turbulence and the strength of the storm and stuff are not necessarily going to be related.
All right, that is so very interesting. And you mentioned you flew through Milton last year, Helene as well. We've always watched the track, and obviously it takes some miles, hundreds of miles off the coast. When do you guys go through this hurricane, different hurricanes? How far off? How much formation has a hurricane had for you guys to say, let's go learn more about a different hurricane?
So we're going to go fly anytime that the National Hurricane Center has interest in the storm and they ask us to be out there. So we've flown storms from when they are just a gathering of clouds and we're looking for the circulation to see whether it's actually going to turn into a storm or anything else like that, all the way, of course, through landfall and degradation. So we'll go out and fly a storm at all the different stages of life.
That's so very interesting. You're looking at just some of these images, and it's hard to fathom what it's like to get out there. And we talk about the active season coming up in terms of this, and obviously what you do helps the National Hurricane Center predict and also helps people prepare a few lines down the road. How much gratitude does it give you to see the impacts of your work on real life, on real people here in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, so everybody who's flying these missions is here because we want to make sure that everybody who is in the United States and, anywhere that could be impacted by these storms has the best information that they can possibly have to make the right decisions for themselves, their property, and their family. Whether it's a really busy hurricane season or ends up being, we all actually hope that we don't have anything to do, that, there's nothing that's going to impact anybody. But everyone does need to remember, of course, that, it only takes a single storm to really change your life. So anytime you're getting warnings or there's a risk, make sure you're taking those very seriously.
All right, Chris, my last question before I let you go, and I got to ask this because we've seen so much within the federal government, cuts to NOAA, cuts to different parts of the government. Have you seen any impacts on your work at the hurricane hunters, impacts from DOGE, impacts from some of the cuts within these departments?
So our organization has done everything that they can to make sure that we are ready and prepared to support our mission and the public this hurricane season and for all the rest of the projects that we do throughout the year.
All right. Well, we thank you for everything that you do. Chris Wood, Lieutenant Commander there, a hurricane hunter. We're getting into hurricane season, so we appreciate your time. I know it's going to be a busy season, so please stay safe.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. All right, great conversation right there here on Live Now from Fox as we are officially heading into hurricane season, as Chris Wood heading into hurricanes himself. And of course, as we cover it here on Live Now from Fox, coming up this Sunday, we'll have much more on this hurricane season. We'll have all the coverage over the storms expected, some 13 to 19 named storms, 3 to 5 major storms. Coverage begins Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern.